Welcome to the Republican Professor. I'm your host, Dr. Lucas J. Mather. Today we're covering Pope Leo on private property. How are you guys doing today? I don't have a screen to share today. I'm going to read from this volume, Catholic Social Thought. The subtitle is The Documentary Heritage. It's edited by David J. O'Brien and Thomas A. Shannon. And it's published by Orbis Books, which is a pretty famous Catholic publisher. My favorite volume in the Orbis book line is my former professor, Ralph R. Koval's book, Confucius, the Buddha, and Christ, A History of the Gospel in Chinese. Maybe we'll get to that book at some point, good old Ralph. But today, no, today we're going to get to Rerum Novarum, encyclical letter of Our Holy Father by Divine Providence is the subtitle. Pope Leo XIII on the condition of labor. Um, you might be wondering if I'm Catholic. I'm not Catholic. I was educated at a Catholic school and I taught at a Catholic school for over a decade, Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles, California. I am a graduate of the Bioethics Institute at LMU that is in Los Angeles. So I got my third master's degree there. And I taught in the philosophy department for over a decade there in University Hall in Los Angeles. Um, so I've, in at LMU, I would say there are some Catholics there. Um, they're, um, they're, I don't know if I want to say too much because I'm not really a part of the Catholic world. I have been trained in a bioethical tradition, that aspect of Catholic social thought that is disciplined toward bringing theology to bear on public policy as it relates to biomedical philosophy of science kind of things, where the philosophy is the ethics part of science, not primarily the metaphysics and epistemology, although metaphysics and epistemology is always relevant in philosophy of science. But the heritage of Catholic social thought also includes uh, applying theology, Christian theology, to economic regulation and political movements as it pertains to economics. So that, of course, is our topic today, and I'm not going to get through this whole thing, Rerum Novarum, because it's too long for one episode. But I did want to introduce the topic, and you know that the new pope who took the place of Francis. Francis insisted on being called Frank to his friends, but the new pope has taken the name Leo. I'm not totally sure the significance of that, so I'm not going to comment on that. Um, I would say ask him yourself, but that's probably unlikely. But this is Pope Leo the 13th, and he's writing in 1800s, late 1800s, when Marxism and socialism was on the rise. And those socialist movements that came to fruition, those revolutions that came into fruition in the 1900s, they were still um, there in kind of the cradle, okay, in the intellectual atmosphere, which is how a lot of this stuff gets started. So the Pope weighs in, and here's what he has to say. It is not surprising that, and helpfully that he says this is number one, okay? He just says points, number one. It is not surprising that the spirit of revolutionary change, which has long been predominant in the nations of the world, should have passed beyond politics and made its influence felt in the cognate field of practical economy. The elements of a conflict are unmistakable. The growth of industry, the surprising discoveries of science, the changed relations of masters and workmen, the enormous fortunes of individuals and the poverty of the masses, the increased self-reliance and the closer mutual combination of the working population, and finally, a general moral deterioration. The momentous seriousness of the present state of things just now fills every mind with painful apprehension. Wise men discuss it, practical men propose schemes, popular meetings, legislatures, and sovereign princes are all occupied with it. And there is nothing which has a deeper hold on public attention. Therefore, venerable brethren, as on former occasions, when it seemed opportune to refute false teaching, we have addressed you in the interests of the Church and of the Commonwealth, and have issued letters on political power, on human liberty, on the Christian constitution of the state, and on similar subjects. So now we have thought it useful to speak on the condition of labor. It is a matter on which we have touched once or twice already, but in this letter, the responsibility of the apostolic office urges us to treat the question expressly and at length in order that there may be no mistake as to the principles which truth and justice dictate for its settlement. The discussion is not easy, nor is it free from danger. It is not easy to define the relative rights and mutual duties of the wealthy and of the poor, of capital and of labor. And the danger lies in this, that the crafty agitators constantly make use of these disputes to pervert men's judgments and to stir up the people to sedition. Again, this is Pope Leo XIII, 1891, Rerum Novarum, okay? 1891, on the condition of labor. Rerum Novarum. And there's an introduction here with the editors. I think it's good to read the introduction, and you get a little flavor for the scholarly introduction. I'm not going to cover that. I'll leave you to throw some business toward Orbis Books in Maryknoll, New York. Pick up a copy if you want. There's a lot of used copies floating around, and this is a helpful volume. I'll say where I got this volume was at Lighthouse Books in Monterey, California. And I want to thank the proprietor of Lighthouse Books for never failing to sour my good mood by his grumpy demeanor. The guy will never smile. And I guess to me, he looks miserable, but maybe he's just really happy, and that's where he gets his jollies, is just frowning at everybody. But maybe he's a victim of theft a lot or something. I don't know, but Lighthouse Books, 600 Lighthouse Avenue, Monterey, California. I picked this up on November 29th, 2024, years after Jesus. And anyway, I like the record store right next to it. There's a record store at 604 Lighthouse Avenue. Um, they are quite woke, but there's like every flag except for the American flag, if you know what I mean. But they do have some, you know, good stuff in there. But Lighthouse Books, check it out. This is where I bought this. And let's continue, shall we? We're on number 2. But all agree, and there can be no question whatever, that some remedy must be found and quickly found for the misery and wretchedness which press so heavily at this moment on the large majority of the very poor. The ancient workmen's guilds were destroyed in the last century, and no other organization took their place. Public institutions and the laws have repudiated the ancient religion. Hence, by degrees, it has come to pass that working men have been given over, isolated and defenseless, to the callousness of employers and the greed of unrestrained competition. The evil has been increased by rapacious usury, which, although more than once condemned by the church, is nevertheless, under a different form, but with the same guilt, still practiced by avaricious and grasping men. And to this must be added the custom of working by contract and the concentration of so many branches of trade in the hands of a few individuals, so that a small number of very rich men have been able to lay upon the masses of the poor a yoke little better than slavery itself. This is number 3, Rerum Novarum. To remedy these evils, the socialists, working on the poor man's envy of the rich, endeavor to destroy private property and maintain that individual possessions should become the common property of all, to be administered by the state or by municipal bodies. They hold that by thus transferring property from private persons to the community, the present evil state of things will be set to rights, because each citizen will then have his equal share of whatever there is to enjoy. But their proposals, whose proposals? The socialists. But their proposals are so clearly futile for all practical purposes that if they were carried out, the working man himself would be among the first to suffer. Moreover, they are emphatically unjust. What is emphatically unjust? The socialist plans. Socialists, that's the left, are unjust because they would rob the lawful possessor, bring the state into a sphere that is not its own, and cause complete confusion in the community. Number 4, it is surely undeniable that when a man engages in remunerative labor, the very reason and motive for his work is to obtain property and to hold it as his own private possession. If one man hires out to another his strength or his industry, he does this for the purpose of receiving in return what is necessary for food and living. He thereby expressly proposes to acquire a full and real right, not only to the remuneration, but also to the disposal of that remuneration as he pleases. Thus, if he lives sparingly, saves money, and invests his savings for greater security in land, the land in such a case is only his wages in another form. And consequently, a working man's little estate, thus purchased, should be as completely at his own disposal as the wages he receives for his labor. You guys know that what he's saying here totally contradicts the Democrat creation of the New Deal. You know, that it goes totally against all of that. The modern administrative state that the Democrats created. Just pointing that out. This is the Pope, 1891, Rerum Novarum. Yeah, I mean, let me read this again. Thus, if he lives sparingly, saves money, and invests his savings for greater security in land, the land in such a case is only his wages in another form. And consequently, a working man's little estate, thus purchased, should be as completely at his own disposal as the wages he received for his labor. What about property taxes? I mean, it sounds like Governor DeSantis just recently came out against property taxes. Of course, there's no state income tax in Florida. So what are you going to do about that, DeSantis? This is interesting. Yeah. But it is precisely in this power of disposal that ownership consists. Dude, he sounds like Richard A. Epstein in Takings right now. That that book that we covered a few episodes ago, 40th anniversary. We're going to do more. I got a comment on that on YouTube, and the guy said, do more. And okay, we're going to do more. Don't worry. We're going to get back into Epstein. But dude, I have to share with you what Pope Leo XIII is saying in 1891 against the socialists, Rerum Novarum. This is official Catholic Church teaching. And our new Pope, well, I say the new Pope of the Catholic Church is not my Pope, but the new Pope took the name Pope Leo. Apparently, I think he kind of likes this guy. Maybe. Am I crazy? I don't know. Maybe. I don't know. If you're Catholic and you know about this stuff, let me know. It is precisely in this power of disposal that ownership consists. Yeah, that's what Epstein is saying. Ownership means discretion in how you use things, whether the property be land or movable goods. The socialists, therefore, in endeavoring to transfer the possessions of individuals to the community, from individuals to the community, strike at the interests of every wage earner, for they deprive him of the liberty of disposing of his wages, and thus of all hope and possibility of increasing his stock and bettering his condition in life. Wow. Wow, 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 wow. Dang. We'll do one more section, section 5. I'm on page 16 of Catholic Social Thought, a documentary heritage with primary sources, edited by, and this volume is edited by David J. O'Brien, Thomas A. Shannon, Orbis Books, get yourself a copy, follow along. Incidentally, the Vatican and stuff, the Vatican has a website. They have this stuff on there for free if you want. So you don't, I mean, I prefer a book, and the Vatican's translation is a little bit different, but I'm not sure who translated this or if the Pope was writing in English. I don't think he was. But anyway, this is number 5, okay? Rerum Novarum, 1891, Pope Leo XIII. What is of still greater importance, however, is that the remedy they propose is manifestly against justice. The remedy they propose, who's they? The socialists, the statists, the communitarian people, the people that want to transfer the rights of individuals to the community. That's who he's talking about. They're called socialists. Sometimes we call them left-wingers. I think the Nazis were socialists. I think the communists were socialists. And the intellectual roots of those practical takeovers of government that occurred decades later, the intellectual roots are being responded to here by an official Catholic Church teaching. So that's the only point I'm trying to make is you want to know this history. Okay? So for every man has by nature the right to possess property as his own. This is one of the chief points of distinction between man and the animal creation. For the brute has no power of self-direction. By brute, he means animal, non-human. The brute has no power of self-direction, but is governed by two chief instincts, which keep his powers alert, move him to use his strength, and determine him to action without the power of choice. These instincts are, for the animals, self-preservation and the propagation of the species. Both can attain their purpose by means of things which are close at hand. Beyond their surroundings, the brute creation cannot go. Brute creation means the animals. They're not humans, they're lower in the created order. For they are moved to action by sensibility alone and by the things which the senses perceive. But with man, it is different indeed. He proposes, on the one hand, the full perfection of animal nature, and therefore he enjoys, at least as much as the rest of the animal race, the fruition of the things of the body. But animality, however perfect, is far from being the whole of humanity, and is indeed humanity's humble handmaid, made to serve and obey. It is the mind or the reason, which is the chief thing in us who are human beings. It is this which makes a human being human and distinguishes him essentially and completely from the brute. And on this account, namely, that man alone among animals possesses reason, it must be within his right to have things not merely for temporary and momentary use as other living things have them, but in stable and permanent possession. He must have not only things which perish in the using, but also those which, though used, remain for use in the future. He's talking about land. He's talking about acquiring property, durable goods, not consumable goods, but durable goods. Okay, here's one example. Um, I am on staff for the church. Part of my duties are supply. So I go and get coffee cups. Those are not durable goods, those are consumables. We throw them away. I don't like it that we do that. I wish everybody brought their own coffee cup and we didn't have to throw away stuff like that, and we didn't have to constantly buy new. There are a few people at church that bring their own coffee cup, and some that keep it there and just wash it in the sink in the kitchen. We have a kitchen. But that's the difference between consumable and durable goods. He's talking about, and it's a dumb example maybe, but a coffee cup. You want to buy a coffee cup for use in the future. You keep using it. Maybe that's a dumb example, but the principle is this. A building is the same thing. We want to use the building in the future. I'm also in charge of the property in terms of the property management. Okay. As the church warden, I'm the church warden. And so I'm I'm in charge of the security and maintenance and the well-being of the physical property, the inventory, and supervising our contractors and supervising our subtenants and maintaining quality relationship between landlord and tenant. That's all so that we can have plans for the future, so that we can uh, develop our minds and spirits in a church service. And that's what he's talking about. I mean, any college that would want to have land, same thing, so that you can use it in the future. People are the same way. He's saying the working poor, they're the same. They want their little estate. Maybe it's a tiny house, maybe it's a tiny plot of land, but they want it to be theirs. And it is theirs if they've earned it. And the state should not be interfering with that. That's what he's saying. The socialists are wrong. The socialists want to constantly interfere and tinker and micromanage and take from the individual and give it to the community, whatever that is. Usually it just means the government. In other words, injustice. He calls that against justice. So, this issue of man's nature, I think I want to mention, I do want to comment on this. Aristotle was, if you know medieval philosophy, you can hear it coming out, the Thomas Aquinas stuff. Thomas Aquinas was heavily influenced by Aristotle, and I think for good reason. I mean, Aristotle was one of, well, the probably the earliest systematic thinker on metaphysics. And uh, what I mean by systematic is I think he's more organized than Plato was, who was his teacher. And I think he he came up with 10 categories of ultimate reality. Okay. One category is what's called substance, which is an individual thing. And then all the things that the substance could be true of the substance, 9 different categories of uh, acting and acting upon, place, position, quality, quantity, so on and so forth. Any way of defining a substance, an individual. But so take an individual living thing like Socrates. Socrates is a man. So Socrates could have a quantity of one, have a certain quality, meaning ways to describe him qualitatively. Position, he's sitting down. Uh, Acting, he's speaking. Acting upon, he's being spoken to, etc. For those 10 categories, for those 9 categories besides substance. But when you're considering the definition of the substance itself, that is what kind of a thing it is, classification comes into play. Classification is different than categories. Classification would be the abstractions that are true of that individual by its nature. So Socrates is a man, and a man is, probably evolutionary people love to get in here and start adding the purely animalistic elements of his nature, like he's Homo sapien, he's a hominid, bipedal mammal, a bipedal primate, and then primate is type of mammal, and then you get into, kingdom, phylum, all that stuff until you finally get into a living organism, and you're getting into levels of abstraction. That's called classification. And what the Pope is saying here in number 5, when you're talking about what kind of a thing a man is, he says reason is the key thing. The ancients would have said being able to reason by talking and justifying your actions, making sure that your actions are justifiable to other people. Um, that can sometimes be damaged. So the reason I'm adding this is because a lot of my students have said, well, if reason is what really is the distinguishing feature, well, what about a fetus? A fetus can't reason. Or somebody who has an illness of some kind, or somebody who's unconscious, somebody that has damage to their brain or something like that. Um, well, the issue of classification is about the definition of a kind of thing, and that would hold true because of the kind of thing it is, even if it's damaged, and even if that aspect of what a thing is doesn't show forth um, because of age, because it hasn't had a chance to develop yet, it would still be the kind of thing it is because of the ordinary development phases that that kind of thing would go through. So that's just a little bit of metaphysics for you. I think we're going to do one more section, section 6. Okay, the power of reason. This becomes still more clearly evident if we consider man's nature a little more deeply. For man, comprehending by power of his reason things innumerable and joining the future with the present, being moreover the master of his own acts, governs himself by the foresight of his counsel, under the eternal law and power of God, whose providence governs all things. Wherefore it is in his power to exercise his choice, not only on things which regard his present welfare, but also on those which will be for his advantage in things to come. Hence, man can possess not only the fruits of the earth, remember, this is on private property, okay? Hence, man can possess not only the fruits of the earth, but also the earth itself. For of the products of the earth, he can make provision for the future. And this is what the Pope is saying. The socialists are at war with this reality. They're at war with reality itself. Man's needs do not die out, but recur. Satisfied today, they demand supplies tomorrow. And I'm well aware of that as the supply guy at the church. I'm always getting supplies. Nature therefore owes to man a storehouse that shall never fail, the daily supply of his daily wants. And this he finds only in the inexhaustible fertility of the earth. Nor must we at this stage have recourse to the state. Let me repeat that. Nor must we at this stage have recourse to the state. Man is older than the state, and he holds the right of providing for the life of his body prior to the formation of any state. That's the Pope, dude. That's the Pope on private property. We got through number 6. We'll start on number 7 next time that we cover this. Thanks for joining me on the Republican Professor podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Lucas J. Mather. Today is 21 May 2025, years after Jesus. I'll be going to my grandfather's funeral. He was 102. He was featured on this podcast 21 November 2024. The funeral is at Godspeak Calvary Chapel, um, in Newberry Park off the 101 in California, Ventura County. Grandpa Mather is survived by his wife since 1995, Linda Lopez Mather, who is the daughter of Sal Lopez of Sal's Mexican Inn, ran a famous restaurant in Oxnard, California for decades and decades. Um, I actually got to eat there one time a long time ago. I think it was back in 2006 or seven or something like that. Um, I wish I had pictures of that. I cannot believe I didn't take any. But it was before the iPhone, so I didn't have a camera on me all the time. And I wish I would have taken pictures. But anyway, that's Linda. Not my grandmother. My grandmother died 1992. Grandpa remarried. Grandpa lived to 102 years old, or he would say years young. And Pastor Rob McCoy will be doing the eulogy, and I'll probably get up and speak and say a few things. Um, Brad Cummings, also a guest on this podcast, publisher of The Shack, the Founder's Bible, producer of the film The Shack, goes to that church, was a parishioner with my grandpa, so I'm not sure if I'll see him there. I hope I will. Um, um, Good man. I enjoy Brad a lot. Hope to see him. Uh, great, great guest on this podcast. We talked for 3 hours. Pepperdine alum. Um, Yes, and I think I'll be seeing some family members who are able to come in. Not everybody's able to come into town. But yeah, that'll be a time for us. So thanks for joining me on this edition of the Republican Professor podcast, where we cover a little bit of Catholic social thought. Uh, Rerum Novarum, numbers 1 through 6. We're going to get through the entire Rerum Novarum eventually, while we're covering Richard A. Epstein's takings, and I want you to see how similar these guys are. It's great. It's great fun. All right, well, we'll take care. Bye.